This is what you can do about taking control of your own health. A podcast for people interested in exploring why we get sick, as well as in learning how to create bodies that are healthy, fit, strong, and disease resistant. I'm Sean McClendon, certified personal trainer, author, and health and fitness enthusiast. Thank you for joining me. In this episode, I want to talk about, yes, it's high blood pressure, but why? Before we get into it, though, my featured book for this episode is What You Can Do About High Blood Pressure, a book I wrote back in 2015, and I've revised it since then. Most people know that high blood pressure is one of the leading killers in the United States and other countries, causing strokes, heart attacks, and kidney disease, just to name a few. What many don't know, however, is that high blood pressure is a lifestyle disease, meaning that it is caused by the way that we live. This book, What You Can Do About High Blood Pressure, will empower you with lifestyle changing strategies to lower your blood pressure naturally. The book includes in-depth information about what causes high blood pressure, natural ways to lower your blood pressure without drugs, and a 4-week plan for implementing the blood pressure lowering strategies into your lifestyle. There are natural ways to control high blood pressure that you can start today. Are you ready to adopt a healthier lifestyle and reduce and possibly eliminate your need for blood pressure medicine? This is your book. Also, I want you to consider my Lean and Tone online fitness challenge feature. If you know that you need exercise and diet guidance and accountability, you might be interested in my Lean and Tone online fitness challenge. For $99 a month, you will receive my access to my 10 to 15 minute body weight exercise routines, my fat loss workbook called 8 Weeks to Transform Your Diet and Your Health, food journal review by me, and a weekly diet and lifestyle accountability group. Yes, you'll be on a group call, and I'll be giving you real-time feedback in the group so that the other people will hear, and you'll hear their feedback as well. But it's not about shame. It's about community and accountability. You will receive certified personal trainer expertise, again, from myself, as well as group accountability to help you once and for all reach your personal health goals. Sometimes that's all you really need. You might have a great plan, but you don't have the accountability to keep you on the plan, to hold you accountable to staying on it long enough to get results. Learn more about my challenge at patreon.com/Sean B2B Fitness. All right, so now let's get into this episode. Yes, it's high blood pressure, but why? So, many years ago in my, my early 20s, it's weird to say that. Many years ago in my early 20s. Anyhow, I had gone to the doctor, and I can't remember exactly why I went, but I think I was a little nervous. I don't particularly care for the doctor anyway, but I think I was just a little bit nervous about something. But anyhow, you go in and they process you, take your vitals, as they say, and then you wait for the doctor to come in. And so the nurse came in and took my vitals. Sorry, I'm having to turn this phone down here. The nurse came in and took my vitals, took my blood pressure, and was like, huh. And so I was like, what do you mean, huh? I didn't say that, but that's how I felt. Like, your blood pressure's a little high. Let's take it again. And so they took it again. And by that time, I'm kind of tripping a little bit. I'm like, I never had issues with my blood pressure. What in the world is going on? And so they took my blood pressure again and said it had gone down a little bit, but it was still high. And they made note of it and said they were going to tell the doctor. So now, like, I'm just really kind of going places in my head, like, God, what's wrong? What's going on? I never had any sort of issues like this with anything. And so the doctor came and talked with me, and he was like, after he kind of told me who he was and this and that, he was like, so I see that your blood pressure is a little high. We can definitely prescribe something for that. And he kind of went on to kind of explain in a little bit of detail, like the different type of things that could be prescribed and whatnot. And I will go ahead and say off the top, I'm not one who's eager to just take anything, any sort of medication, even supplementation, to be honest. But I'm not eager to just take anything in my body. And so I'm also not one to rush into taking medications unless I kind of know that I really need them. And so I was like, okay, well, can I like take like I haven't really been, exercising, get my rest and stuff like that. I was young and busy and not really doing what I need to do. And so I was like, can I like just exercise and stuff like that? He was like, yeah, you can do that too. And so when he said that, I was like, I can do that too. That's kind of weird. And so he didn't prescribe me with anything. He just told me to make sure I did that, more or less. And that was that. So that was many years ago that happened. But I still remember it to this day because of what I felt was the quickness with which he was about to prescribe me with something. Without really asking me like what was going on with me, without asking me why, asking the question, why was I dealing with that at that young age? And that's kind of why I wanted to talk about this in this first episode of this podcast, what you can do about taking control of your own health. He never asked me why. Now, I'm not really saying this to like say that the doctor was a bad person. I'm not saying it to imply that at all, because I think that doctor's visit was more so kind of like demonstrating just like the state of our, the way that we approach health in our society. But he never really asked me why. And even though, I mean, I've been in health and fitness and kind of like curious about this stuff for a really, really long time, since I was a kid. And I didn't know then as much as I know now about, for example, high blood pressure. But I did know that a lot of this stuff happens because of lifestyle to some degree. So it was just kind of weird. So that's what I want to talk about. Say, for example, you're somebody who's listening. You've been diagnosed with high blood pressure. Now, don't misunderstand me. I am not saying by any means that you should not take your medication. I'm not going to say that. I'm not doing that type of thing. Always check with your doctor before you do any sort of, different type of thing with your lifestyle and whatnot. But say you've been diagnosed with high blood pressure before. Do you know why you got high blood pressure? And the reason why I ask that is because, and I don't want to get ahead of myself, but we kind of treat disease in general as something that just kind of spontaneously happens, like it's luck of the draw. But a healthy, functioning body does not normally have high blood pressure. So it happens for a reason. I personally believe that everything has some sort of cause behind it. Everything, even if you don't really understand it, or even if it's not something that's been really fully like learned or investigated or understood, I believe everything has a cause. I think everything has a purpose. Everything has a cause. And for sure, high blood pressure is one of those things. Because again, a normally functioning body does not have what we call high blood pressure. But again, I don't want to get ahead of myself. What I do want to talk about now is, let's think about this. First of all, like, what is high blood pressure? Like, what pressure are they talking about? So in case you didn't know, high blood pressure is, so your body is inundated with blood vessels that go all around your body, and they're responsible for supplying your whole body with oxygen, which every cell of your body needs. But oxygen is taken in through your lungs, and from your lungs it goes into your air sacs, and then those thin air sacs allow oxygen to transfer from that inhaled air into the blood that's in there. The blood pulls in the oxygen, and then the blood transports the oxygen all around the body. When it gets all around, it gets transported back to your body by veins. The arteries transfer oxygenated blood to the body. Veins transfer deoxygenated blood back to the heart and lungs, so that it can be reoxygenated. So like blood vessels are like a highway for blood, for oxygen and for nutrients. So anyhow, your body, your blood vessels are all throughout your body. It's lots and lots of blood vessels. And literally, when we talk about high blood pressure, we're talking about the pressure of the blood inside of those blood vessels. So what happens is, and just if you can imagine, like, say for example, this little circle, if you're watching this podcast, this circle that I'm making is like the inside of like a garden hose. So like literally, like say for example, if you run water through a garden hose, usually that garden hose is flexible enough to expand. There is like a force of the water on the outside of the walls of the garden hose. It's exerting a pressure on the walls of the garden hose. That is akin to the pressure of blood inside of our blood vessels. Pressure. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about blood pressure. Now, high blood pressure is essentially a determination that above a certain pressure, you have two different types of pressure. Systolic blood pressure and diastolic blood pressure. And I should have looked it up before I recorded this podcast, but the systolic and diastolic have to do with different phases of the heartbeat, because you know your heartbeat has it has all the chambers and whatnot, the ventricles and the chambers. The ventricles and the atria, and they pump. And so systolic and diastolic have to do with the two different phases of the heartbeat, and whatnot. There's more detail, but I just can't remember it off the top now. But anyhow, it's two different blood pressures. And so high blood pressure is determined to be, I think, somewhere above that. It used to be 120 systolic, and then 80 diastolic, but I think it's a little lower than that now. That's considered like the maximum for it to be normal. And of course it can vary, I think, with individuals, but that's kind of like the average. But anyhow, high blood pressure is determined to be over 120 if you're talking about systolic blood pressure, and over 80 if you're talking about diastolic blood pressure. And it's those high blood pressures that essentially are supposedly associated with dysfunction, associated with symptoms and increased risk for complications and other issues. And the reason why high blood pressure is problematic is, again, going back to the garden hose analogy. If that garden hose is stretched on the inside a lot, you know, like maybe you have like a nozzle that is hooked up to that's really, really powerful, like it's actually going to over time kind of like tear up the inside of that. It's going to stretch that garden hose a bit. You know, think about like if you overstretch a rubber band and it loses elasticity and it becomes less pliable and whatnot, and it's more likely to leak and stuff like that. So that's kind of like the type of thing that happens with our blood vessels, except when it happens with your blood vessels, it can result in pretty serious issues with your kidneys. It can be associated with strokes and whatnot, aneurysms, which are very, very dangerous, and can be lethal. So that's what high blood pressure is. That's literally what it is. And I think it's always important to kind of understand what stuff is. Sometimes we just don't know. It's just like some sort of medical term. Now, the other question that I want us to consider is why, the why of high blood pressure. Because again, I believe that on average, we consider when we get a diagnosis, we don't really consider why it happens. We just kind of figure, oh, I'm getting older. My body is doing what it's going to do. My body's broken and whatnot. But perhaps it's not that your body is broken. Perhaps it is that your body is showing you in its own way that it's not getting what it needs, and therefore it's not able to function normally. So consider this. Consider again the garden hose analogy. If you have a garden hose and you put like a little kink in it, what happens? You can literally feel the pressure on the inside increase. Okay? Because what happens is you've narrowed the space that that blood can travel through. And so it increases the pressure around there like significantly, very significantly. So one thing that is a cause of high blood pressure is narrowed blood vessels. Now there are a few different ways that blood vessels can narrow. It can be from without or from within. So within, you may have heard of the term atherosclerosis or arteriosclerosis. Both of those have to do with what's called hardening of the arteries. And what happens is fatty deposits, usually by a diet that's filled with particularly like trans fats, like bad fats, which all fats aren't bad. That'll be another episode, I'm sure. But filled with these harmful trans fats, which are like processed fats and whatnot. Those fatty deposits lay down in your blood vessels, and over time, those fatty deposits narrow the space that blood can travel. So you might have a blood vessel that's like this, but it gets fatty stuff here on the inside, and so the amount of space that blood can travel through gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And so therefore, the pressure inside of those blood vessels gets higher and higher and higher. It just makes perfect sense. Now, there can also be a narrowing of the blood vessels from without. What I mean is you have the blood vessel here, and then there's pressure on the outside that's squeezing those blood vessels tight. And I actually revised my book last year. After from my research, I learned, I read a study that was talking about how a lack of flexibility, particularly in the trunk region, your trunk being like your torso, can cause an increase in blood pressure because you have these big arteries, these big blood vessels, that travel through your trunk. And if you are unable to touch your toes in a sit and reach stretch test, then what happens is those muscles and stuff that are around those major blood vessels are tight. And so because they're tight, they're squeezing on those major blood vessels and increasing the pressure on the blood vessels without, which causes a squeezing of the blood vessels and higher blood pressure. So hopefully you're already starting to see why it's important to understand some of the whys of high blood pressure. And not just that it just happened. Okay. So another thing is increased blood volume. What I mean is a higher amount of blood or, liquid traveling through the bloodstream. And one of the ways that happens is water retention. So sometimes because of dietary problems, what I mean by dietary problems is a diet that is unhealthy, and in particular has a lot of sodium and or very not enough potassium. The body will retain water. Your kidneys are what regulate the amount of water is in your body, and they require like a particular sodium potassium balance. And when that balance is disrupted by a diet that is not balanced, then a lot of times it tends to lean more toward the sodium than it should. And then what happens is your body retains water, and a lot of that water is retained in your blood, and then therefore you have more pressure on the walls of your blood vessels. More pressure on the walls of your blood vessels, and that means higher blood pressure due to water retention. That's why a lot of times when people get diagnosed with high blood pressure, they're given diuretics, things that pull water out of your body to try to reduce that blood volume, So that's another reason. Okay. And so and I will say this, what I'm talking about here is by no means exhaustive. This is like stuff I found out based on my own research, because I've been looking into this stuff for years, ever since I wrote my book on what you can do about high blood pressure. But this is by no means exhaustive. But hopefully it kind of stimulates you to kind of like want to understand more. Another thing is your blood pressure can increase by increased load on the body. And when I say increased load on the body, I mean increased load on the body through, you're putting a greater demand on your body by moving it more, or you're putting a greater demand on your body based on the amount of weight that you're carrying. So blood pressure increases are actually a natural thing. Your blood pressure is supposed to increase with movement. When you kind of do more stuff, like when you move more, if you run or you walk faster than you normally would or whatever, then your heart is going to go ahead and speed up to meet the increased demand of oxygen that your muscles are requiring. So it's going to be pumping faster and harder. And so your blood pressure is going to increase a bit to kind of get that oxygenated blood to and from those muscles that need more oxygen and need more nutrients. So that's natural. It's supposed to be like that. Also, whenever you have extra weight, like when you're carrying more weight than your frame normally carries, that increases your blood pressure indirectly. Because again, what happens is your body is having to do more work and to carry the extra weight. And because it's having to do more work, it's just like if you were to, tow a, something on your, like a trailer with your truck or something like that. You're gonna burn more gas because it's taking more for your truck to pull that extra weight. And it's the same way with your heart when it comes to you carrying extra weight on your frame. And so what happens is if you have extra weight, then your heart has to beat harder, has to beat faster, and therefore your blood pressure increases. All right, and then finally, the last reason I wanted to give for blood pressure being higher has to do with the stress response. So you've very likely heard of what's called the fight or flight response that your body has to prepare you to defend yourself or to get out of a dangerous situation, or maybe you participate in a competitive activity that requires you to think fast, move fast. Your body has this whole response that includes all kind of stuff, to kind of get you all heightened, and secretion of adrenaline and noradrenaline and other hormones and stuff like that. And among those things, among the responses of your body are your heart beating faster and harder, your blood pressure increasing. It's natural. It's a natural part of the response. Now, that also happens whenever you are stressed out about, when you're worrying about something, when you're, real fearful about down about something. And when you are like that all the time, that means that your body gets accustomed to having that same kind of stress response over and over and over and over again, and kind of being in a state of chronic stress. So chronic stress means that you're going to have elevated blood pressure a lot of the time. And your body actually, for example, one of the other parts of the stress response is your breathing gets a little more shallow. You don't take as deep of breaths. And what happens is when you keep on having those stress responses in a chronic way, then your body becomes accustomed to operating in that way. So you get triggered easier. And for example, your breathing may be more shallow for, on average, even when you feel okay, because you've kind of trained yourself to breathe a certain way. You're breathing from your chest rather than from your belly. And it becomes kind of like how your body operates more normally. Not a good thing. That kind of thing can result in blood pressure that is higher than it needs to be all the time. Okay? And that's where I want to leave that here. I could obviously kind of go ahead and start talking about what you can do to kind of like, kind of counteract some of these effects. But I think you can already start to see more intuitively how you might do that. But I just kind of want to open your mind. Just think about this. Think about what high blood pressure or anything else, and we'll talk about other things on this podcast. Think about the fact that there is a reason for high blood pressure. There's a reason for lifestyle diseases like high blood pressure like that. And there's nothing wrong with medication. Medications save a lot of lives, save people from a lot of acute effects of, lifestyle diseases and whatnot. But the thing to understand is there's a reason. And if there's a reason for blood pressure being higher, that means there's a root issue that has to be resolved for you to actually, for real, overcome high blood pressure or whatever it is that you're talking about. So keep that in mind. And the thing about most medications is that although they are definitely good short term, they don't tend to solve the issue in the long term. They just tend to, it ends up being more of an attempt to protect you from the effects of the high blood pressure or whatever it is, whatever lifestyle disease that you're talking about. So keep that in mind. Understand why. And if you might even be able to kind of like think to yourself, okay, so I've been diagnosed with high blood pressure before. What has my life been like where it could have contributed to me developing this? Because your body is not just fundamentally broken. That's not really how it works. Your body is demonstrating like a response to its environment, because our bodies respond based on the environment that they're given. And if the environment is not really right for the body to operate normally, then the body's going to start to operate differently. And that's kind of like where the messaging is coming from, where it's like, okay, something is wrong. I'm not getting what I need. Some input is not good for this body, this temple. Okay. So hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully this provides some insight to you, some things to think about when it comes to you taking control of your own health and thinking through what kind of lifestyle changes you might incorporate on your own. But that does it for this episode. So if you found this podcast helpful, I invite you to subscribe on YouTube or Apple Podcasts or wherever else you found this podcast, and feel free to leave a comment. And if you're on Apple Podcasts in particular, I would appreciate if you left an honest review of this podcast, what you can do about taking control of your own health. Now, don't forget to look up today's featured product, my book, What You Can Do About High Blood Pressure. The link to purchase that book is below in the description. And if you are interested in my fitness challenge, that link is also below, patreon.com/SeanB2B Fitness. And if you're a reader, come on and join my email list, SeanMcClendon.com/subscribe. That does it again. Thank you. And remember, your doctor is not responsible for your health. You are. God bless you.